Alabama plays Vanderbilt in a revenge spot, which is not something I thought I would ever have to say. But of course, this is a revenge spot from Alabama's loss last season. Vanderbilt is 5-0, and this is the game day game. College Game Day has chosen this over the Miami Florida State game. I'm sure that was chosen because of Florida State's loss to Virginia. I'm sure Florida State fans are not too happy that they were able to knock off Alabama, and then Alabama Vandy gets Game Day over them hosting Miami. However, this is a huge game in the SEC. Again, this is a revenge spot. This is a spot where, in my mind, Alabama has a lot to prove because I think that Diego Pavia and this Vanderbilt team has been very successful this season and has done a lot to prove that they were not a fluke last season. Again, they're 5-0. This is a Vanderbilt team that beat South Carolina. We'll talk a little bit about that game. They beat them by a score of 31-7 earlier this season. They are one of the teams that has not had a ton. They haven't had their off week yet. They actually have their first off week after this game, right? So their first off week is after the Alabama game, which is a little later than a lot of the other teams in the SEC had it. And obviously Alabama had ours before the Georgia game. I know some others are having it this week. So Vanderbilt, playing 6 games before they have their first bye week, that is, in my mind, going to be a little bit of an advantage to Alabama, just because obviously we've had time to prepare and work on some things in the off week, as well as some time to get some guys recovered and healthy. Obviously, we will be without a couple of guys for injury, as I'm sure all teams are going to be at this point in the football season. Injuries are a part of the game. It's something you just have to deal with. I don't want to, worry too much about it because, again, this is just a part of the way that college football works. But I do think that Alabama, having already had our off week, that is able to get us a guy like Jam Miller and Tim Keenan back, and that's obviously a huge deal. We saw kind of the impact that they were able to play in that Georgia game, and I think that they will obviously have major impacts in this Vanderbilt game as well. When we look at the Vanderbilt-South Carolina game, and I just want to talk about that because that was Vanderbilt's one game against a Power 5 opponent. We'll talk about this one. We'll talk a little bit about the Alabama-Vanderbilt game from last season, and then, of course, we'll break down this season's game. When you look at the Vanderbilt-South Carolina game from earlier this season, Diego Pavia, 177 yards. Something I think you really want to point out is that they're tied in as their leading receiver this season. Obviously, they have had one more game than Alabama, but if you stack them up from a receiving yard standpoint, he's actually had more receptions and more receiving yard, or just slightly less, receiving yards, 9 yards less than Jeremy Bernard, to put it into perspective. Jeremy Bernard has 310 receiving yards, whereas Eli Stowers, their tight end, has 301, so a very, very good receiving option at tight end. Diego Pavia currently actually has a few more passing yards than Ty Simpson on 6 more completions. Again, they have played one additional game, so that isn't super shocking. Something else to consider when you're looking at Diego Pavia, he is currently their leading rusher at just under 300 yards on the ground. We know that from the game last season. Diego Pavia is a huge key to what Vanderbilt's going to want to do on offense. They run more of to a degree, a version of the triple option, a version of the option style team, definitely much more of a passing team than a true triple option, but he definitely has a ton of run pass options as the quarterback, and is, keeping him under control is going to be the name of the game, because Diego Pavia is going to try to beat you both with his legs and his arm. I will say this season you have seen Diego Pavia throwing the ball a lot more than he did last season. That is kind of a little bit different in what you're seeing this season. Last season, Diego Pavia did have 352 passing yards. If we go look at the Alabama game from last season, he had 352 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. Obviously, that was a huge deal. Eli Stowers that we just talked about, huge deal because he had 6 receptions for 113 yards. He definitely was a major issue for us last season, and I will be curious to see what Alabama does from a defensive standpoint and who we line up on him. If he's staying at that tight end position, I would love to see Bray Hubbard on him potentially. Would love to see Keon Sabb get some time on him. Definitely very curious to see what Alabama does from a defensive standpoint. When you look at what happened in that game last season, Vanderbilt had 26 first downs. They were 12 of 18 on third down, 1 of 1 on fourth down. But the big thing is they held the ball for 42 minutes time of possession. What I would look at that game being similar to is honestly very similar to how Alabama held the ball against Georgia just this last game, where they were very, very efficient on offense. They were converting all of their third downs, and it really felt like Georgia was not able to get the ball back to their offense. That's what Vanderbilt felt like last season. For huge stretches of that game, Vanderbilt was just in total control, and Vanderbilt was able to control the tempo, the clock, as well as able to control, just the line of scrimmage. Vanderbilt was able to convert every fourth down that they really felt like they needed. They were having super long drives. They had, a 10-play drive, a 17-play drive, an 8-play drive, 9-play drive, another 9-play drive, 7-play drive. It was really just a situation where Vanderbilt definitely was able to milk the clock and do whatever they wanted to on offense. In my mind, this game, obviously the Alabama offense is going to be a huge factor in this game, but this comes down to the defense. And I don't think I'm speaking out of term. I think any Alabama fan would know that this comes down to the defense. This is the game that most people circle when you look at last season as a turning point for the Alabama defense last season. When you look at what Alabama did last season following that game, again, when you look at the Alabama points that we gave up in that game, we gave up 40 points in that game. Later on in the season, we didn't give up more than 25 points for the rest of the season. And when you think of how slow Vanderbilt does play, they're not a team that tries to be a quick-hitting, super explosive team that's, running up to the line of scrimmage fast, is trying to score a ton of points. So honestly, the 40 points that Vanderbilt scored in that game was even more than it felt like, right? 40 points to a Tennessee team that likes to run, and have huge explosive plays isn't as big a deal as 40 points to a Vanderbilt team that goes very, very slow, is very methodical at the line of scrimmage, really grinds out the drives, again, 17-play drives. That's a much different team that you're playing against. So, I would look at that being a clear turning point for the Alabama defense last season. The question is, does that turning point continue here this season? I have inclination to believe that it is. I think that Alabama was, frankly, embarrassed against Florida State. I would look at that Florida State game as a bit of an anomaly. Also, that Florida State game being on the road against a team that, unfortunately, I think if Alabama was honest with you, I think that they just thought they were going to walk in and win that game. Florida State being 2-10 last season, I think, was in a lot of players' minds, and they were like, oh, we've got this. We're going to walk in and we're going to win this game. And unfortunately, that's just not how you need to think about any game in college football. You don't need to think of any team like that because anybody can beat you. These are all kids that are playing at the high major college level. They're playing at the Power 4 level, and these are all really good players and really good coaches. And unfortunately, I think if Alabama was honest with you, they would say that they definitely didn't take them seriously. When you look at Vanderbilt, however, I think that what Vanderbilt was able to capitalize on last season was a couple of things. Alabama was both riding the high of the Georgia game because obviously you're able to knock off Georgia in your home stadium. Alabama had not had really any falters in that Georgia game or in the early season last season. Alabama's now ranked number 1 in the country, and now you go to an opposing stadium, and I know Vanderbilt was quick to pop up Nick Saban's quote talking about Vanderbilt not having an electric home stadium. Well, if you looked at that game last season, it wasn't an electric home stadium, right? Alabama had more fans in Nashville than Vanderbilt did. The reason why Vanderbilt won had nothing to do with the stadium. It had partial to do with Alabama's confidence walking in and thinking they were just going to walk all over Vanderbilt. They did not prepare at the level they needed to win that game. So I think that Alabama's inability to take Vanderbilt as seriously as they should have, and Alabama's inability to just do what it takes to win football games is the reason why they lost that game. I think that the reason why this year is going to be different, and I will tell you, I do think that this year is going to be different, is a couple of reasons. One, Gameday's in town. So immediately that is all eyes on this game. I think additionally that 5-0 next to Vanderbilt, as well as the loss last season, the loss last season has a bad taste in everyone's mouth, as well as the 5-0 next to Vanderbilt has an era of confidence that Vanderbilt has coming into this game that Alabama can look at and say, look how good they've been against everyone else. In order for us to beat them, we have to play our A game, right? And I think that Alabama is absolutely going to take them seriously in this game. And so, again, I think the question comes down to your defense. I think this is going to be a lower scoring game because I do think that this is going to be a situation where Alabama and Vanderbilt both, and this is something that my guys over at the Solid Verbal that I listen to all the time, they pointed out that Alabama and Vanderbilt both are two teams that like to slow the game down. They take a lot of time getting to the line of scrimmage. Neither one are trying to run quickly and run super fast plays. They're really trying to be very efficient and methodical at the line. I would definitely say that about both Alabama and Vanderbilt coming into this one. I would additionally say that both teams are going to be trying to a degree, assert what they're trying to do on offense. I think that Alabama will be trying to pick on Vanderbilt's pass defense. I think that it is one of the slightly weaker parts of Vanderbilt's team this season. And then I think, again, Vanderbilt's going to be trying to pick on, if at all possible, Alabama and our inability to stop the run on the outside. Kane Womack in the press conference talked about how he looked at the run defense against the Georgia team as actually not terrible, that there were only 6 to 7 plays that accounted for a huge percentage of Georgia's runs because they were those explosives. And he said when Alabama was able to control the inside run, Alabama was able to have a lot of success. But when they were unable to stop that and they allowed somebody to bounce around the outside, that's when Georgia was able to have a ton of success. They're able to get 6 or 7 huge runs, and then Georgia ends up averaging over 6 yards a carry. I think that's something that obviously Vanderbilt's going to try to take advantage of. When you combine that with what happened and what Gus Malzahn was able to do against us in the Florida State game, there's going to be a lot of eye candy, a lot of eye discipline that you're going to be concerned about in this Vanderbilt game. I think part of the thing that will be able to be successful in this one potentially is I don't think that Alabama is going to play on their heels, right? I can pretty confidently say that. I think that Alabama is going to be not playing on their heels and is going to be flying to the football because of what happened last season. Additionally, playing in your home stadium in front of your home crowd, that's a college game day game that's going to have a ton of atmosphere. I think that additionally is going to have the guys not playing timid, not playing on their heels like you saw in that Florida State game, because I think that was the real issue in that Florida State game. It wasn't as much of the scheme as it was just guys not reacting to what they knew they were seeing. And I think if they can react to what they're seeing, I think that Alabama should be able to have some success in this one. But again, some of your keys are you got to stop Diego Pavia and you got to stop the run game, because at the end of the day, they use the run game to set up the pass. Again, they are passing much more this season than they were last season. Diego Pavia is completing almost 75% of his passes. He has 13 passing touchdowns. He does have 3 interceptions, however. That is something that I would be curious if Alabama is able to do some things in the back end if they start throwing the football where they're able to confuse him at all and potentially get an interception. I think that Kane Womack's defense generally does a good job at getting into quarterbacks' heads from that standpoint and seeing if they can show them some different pictures. Obviously, Alabama was unable to come down with the interception, but Deontay Lawson, for example, had the ball thrown kind of right to him against Georgia. I think that is something where I would be very curious. I think that turnovers, if they happen in this game, will be very, very important. Because I think that if both teams are playing very slow and trying to be methodical on offense, any turnover is going to give the other team a distinct advantage. When you're looking at on the outside, again, Eli Stowers has got to be the guy you point to that you're going to have to keep an eye on. You could also make a big argument for Junior Sherrill. He has 5 receiving touchdowns for them. He is another, just target that you're going to have to definitely look for when he's out on the outside. I think that Alabama's defensive backs are going to have a little bit of their hands full just because of what they're going to be asked to do in the run game as well as in the pass game, again, with that eye discipline as well as your play actions and such. As long as they keep their eye discipline, I don't think that Vanderbilt has the insane athletes on the outside that are going to scare you. Obviously, I don't think that it's crazy to say that our defensive backs are going against better athletes on the outside in practice because of our insane receiving core. So I do think that this is going to be a situation of, as long as they keep their eye discipline and play their role in the specific defensive scheme. So, for example, don't bite on the run, or keep pursuit angles and such. I think that that's going to be your bigger problem from a defensive standpoint. Not that one guy is going to be a crazy athlete that's just going to out athlete you, so to speak. If this comes down to a kicking game, simply put, Vandy has a better kicker than Alabama. Their kicker is currently 5 for 5 on the season. He has a 51-yard field goal. He's perfect. He actually has, funny enough, missed an extra point. But I'm pretty confident in saying he has a slightly better leg than Connor Talty does. I will forever be a little scared because of what Connor Talty did in that Georgia game. That was one of the worst kicks I've ever seen. Connor Talty may, end up working out very, very well for Alabama, but it's going to take a lot for me to unsee what I saw in that Georgia game. That was an abysmal kick. Again, it being in Bryant-Denny Stadium is a very big deal. So there is some value when it comes to that, but I do think that is something to note, that Brock Taylor for Vanderbilt is 5 for 5 in the field goal department with a 51-yard long. So he does have a pretty decent leg and has made some decent field goals this season. One guy that I think that Alabama is going to have to kind of key in on is Miles Capers. He has 3.5 sacks this season for Vanderbilt. And when you look at what Alabama has done this season as a team, Alabama currently does not have a single guy with over 1.5 sacks. That has been one of our problems on the defensive side of the football. Part of it has to do with what the opposing teams are doing and the schemes that are being run. Part of it has to do with just our pass rush. LT Overton with his 1.5 sacks is the only guy that has over 1 sack on the team. So obviously the fact that Vanderbilt has a guy that is over 3.5 sacks, that's something that I am going to, be looking at Wilkin Formby and Michael Carroll and Caden Proctor to see how our guys on the edges are able to control that line of scrimmage and keep a pocket clean for Ty Simpson. I think that if you give Ty Simpson time to work in the pocket with how good our athletes are on the outside, I think that Alabama should be able to have success in the passing game. We have one of the best receiving corps in the entire country, and I think that it would be able to show against Vanderbilt, especially, again, if we give them time to get to that point. We just have to give them time give Ty Simpson time to throw the football. So a lot of that's going to come down to what our offensive line looks like in this game. But I do think that Alabama has the clear advantage when it comes to that our offensive line is going to be better. That our skill talent on the outside is going to be better. So we just need our offensive line to give them the time that it takes to be able to make that throw. So, all of this being said, I think that it's very, very clear that what Vanderbilt's trying to do. They're going to try to have they're going to build the plane out of Diego Pavia and let him do what it takes and see if he can will them to victory. It clearly worked last season. Again, like Diego Pavia was able to have a ton of success. He was able to do everything that he needed, and Diego Pavia has become a better passer this season. Again, 74.5% completion percentage, 13 touchdowns to just 3 interceptions. He has been a very, very good quarterback this season, and if Alabama is not on their A game on defense, he could absolutely beat you. However, I think that where Alabama has the clear advantage is on offense. And I think that Ty Simpson has looked absolutely phenomenal this season. What he's been able to do and working through his progressions, and since that Florida State game, being much faster, working through his progressions, being comfortable in the pocket, just incredible footwork and putting the ball where it needs to be. I've been very, very happy with what I've seen out of him. I expect Ty Simpson to have a big game in this one. I think that having a quarterback that excels in putting the ball and reading coverages and doing what he needs to do with the football is going to be a big deal in this one. I think that there were some throws, last season, I definitely would not consider Jalen Milroe to be the reason that Alabama lost the game by any stretch. I think it was clearly the defense, that 40 points we talked about they gave up. However, I'd still look at Ty Simpson and what he's able to do methodically, moving the ball down the field also allows He just runs a little bit more methodical, not boomer bust offense. And I think that we're going to hold the ball longer and be able to potentially control a little bit more clock than we were able to do last season. I think there was a huge issue with our defense last season, of course, but I think part of that was because our defense was on the field for 42 minutes of the game, right? When you're asking your defense to be out there almost the entire game and then also be able to stop them in crucial moments, I think that that's a major problem. I would be very curious to see how Alabama kind of tries to combat that this season. I'm sure they will try to work in a little bit more of the run as much as possible. Even though Alabama hasn't been super successful running the football, I'd be very curious to see if Ryan Grubb kind of makes a concerted effort to hey, time of possession was a huge problem last season. We need to see what we can do to make this be as even as possible, or Alabama even be in the lead, because that will definitely help our defense be successful long term against Diego Pavia. I would additionally be curious to see if we're, again, as I talked about earlier, if we're able to do anything to confuse Diego Pavia, potentially, work in an interception or something there. But I think the big overarching answer to this is, even though I think that the first game this season does scare me for Alabama, I think that what happened against Florida State and the lack of eye discipline and the lack of effort that I saw on the field does scare me. And if I was going to pick Vanderbilt in this game, it would be because of that one. But I'm going to trust my gut, and I'm going to say that the reason why Alabama was able to have so much success at the end of last season, at least from a defensive standpoint — again, we lost games, but many of those lost games were on the offense, not on the defense. If I'm going to point to that, I'm going to say that Kane Womack was able to fix something within the defense. Not exactly sure what it was, but was able to fix something in the defense, and it became more of a bend but don't break defense. And Alabama was able to get off the field more long term and not give up as many touchdowns. And he clearly saw something that was wrong in the Vanderbilt game that he was able to fix. It was just clearly a better defense. That was kind of the turning point of last season. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ride with my gut, and I'm going to say that whatever it was he found last season, they're going to be able to put in this game. Does that mean that I think that we're going to be able to shut down Vanderbilt? Absolutely not. I think that Diego Pavia is too good of a quarterback to fully shut down. I do think that he's going to get his. I do think that there's a level where they're going to score somewhere between 14 and 24 points because Diego Pavia is a good quarterback. How much, but I would think somewhere probably between 14 and 24. However, I think that Alabama scores between 28 and 42. And if I'm looking at Vandy scoring between 14 and 24 and Alabama between 28 and 42, probably more in that 28-35 range. I'm looking at a score of 35-21, 35-24 type number is what I'm personally looking at from a Vanderbilt for Alabama winning perspective. I do think that the difference in this game is going to be that I think that, for Alabama's credit, I think the fact that they lost last season is going to have them understanding, hey, we have to take this super seriously. Obviously, even though this is at home, we have to do whatever it takes prepared to win. And I think just the benefit of having Ty Simpson under center and the steadying force that's going to allow, I think they're going to understand what they're needing to do from a time of possession standpoint. I think they're going to be understanding what they need to do from a defensive standpoint, with guys like Bray Hubbard and Tim Keenan and just everybody on that side of the football. So I'm going to pick that Alabama wins, and I'm going to say a score of 35-24. I'm going to say 35-24. I do think it's going to be a very good game. I think that Alabama potentially scores that last touchdown late. I think that this is going to be a fairly close game for a huge percentage of it. I think that Diego Pavia and how Vanderbilt is constructed is just that good of a team that I think that they're going to scare us more than we would want them to. I think that in the perfect Bama fans' mind, this turns into a little bit of a blowout, kind of get rid of the stress from losing last season. But unfortunately, I think that this is a good Vanderbilt team, and blowing them out just probably isn't going to happen. Does the world exist? Sure, but I just don't think realistically it's the most likely of scenarios. So like I said, we're going to go 35-24. And of course, we will talk about this game this weekend. I will try to record actually probably after the game tomorrow. Since it's a 2:30 game, I'll try to see if I can record tomorrow night just to go ahead and put that out. And then we will record with our guys over our Mizzou podcast next week as we talked about. So hopefully everybody's enjoyed this. Sorry, I know we got a little long-winded. We talked about this Vanderbilt game. I'm really excited for basketball season if you're interested in that type of content. Probably not going to do anything basketball related this week, but maybe next week we will crack into some basketball content because we are again 2 weeks away from the exhibition against Florida State. So very excited to see what all the team has in store for us this season. Obviously, Alabama has had some different recruits on campus and a lot of different things. There hasn't been a whole lot of noise coming out about that, so I'll definitely keep everybody updated as additional information comes out. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching, and I will catch you in the next episode. Peace.